In this video, we're going to discuss the first of two more advanced visuals, the scatter plot. The scatter plot can be a little tricky to work with the first time, but it plays a very important role in the different business questions that you might find yourself having to answer with Power BI's visualizations. So in this video, we'll discuss what a scatter plot is, when you should use it, and how to build one in Power BI. Scatter plots can be a little tricky for newcomers to understand, but they're not too scary. In fact, they're quite similar to line charts. Scatter plots visualize the relationship between two variables that are oftentimes numeric, so that users can see if a change in one variable tends to show a change in the other variable. Imagine a scenario where we were creating a scatter plot that measures the relationship between practicing Power BI and mastering Power BI. The dots here represent students. This student has a pretty high mastery of Power BI, as indicated by the y-axis, and if we look at the x-axis, they have a lower amount of practice compared to other students. This student, on the other hand, has a high amount of practice, but a very low mastery of Power BI. However, most of the students appear to follow a pattern where the amount of practice is roughly equal to the amount of mastering Power BI. And that's what we would expect. After all, practice makes perfect. When we have a scatter plot where the dots look like they are increasing as we read from left to right, we call that a positive relationship. On this scatter plot, we see a pretty clear positive relationship, and that makes sense, right? These dots are just telling us that, generally speaking, an increase in Power BI practice usually leads to an increase in Power BI mastery. Other scatter plots, though, might show a negative relationship between the two variables. For example, maybe you're starting to tune me out the more I talk. I get it. I've taken a lot of online classes myself, and sometimes it's hard to stay focused when the teacher is just talking and talking. In this case, the dots represent students, and the scatter plot is showing that the longer the teacher talks, the more attention is lost. Scatter plots, of course, are also really good at helping us spot outliers in the data. For example, maybe one of your Power BI students will practice Power BI for just a little while and become an expert much faster than other students. It could be you for all I know. But if we see a dot that looks lonely compared to the many others on the chart, that could be an outlier in your data, and scatter plots can be great at highlighting outliers. Then again, maybe my whole theory about practice makes perfect is completely wrong. Maybe there's no relationship whatsoever between practicing Power BI and mastering Power BI. That seems far-fetched, but if that's true, scatter plots also show us when there is no relationship at all between the two variables that we're evaluating. Then again, maybe a scatter plot can't tell us anything except that our data points are all very clustered together. Scatter plots don't always show a positive or negative relationship, but sometimes they can reveal clusters in our data that we did not know exist. So hopefully you're feeling better about scatter plots. Although they can be somewhat tricky to build and to interpret, they're a powerful visual and very useful when you need to analyze relationships. The y-axis is what we're actually trying to measure or observe. It's the dependent variable that we want to see change as a value in our x-axis increases. Our x-axis is the independent variable that we're measuring against. In the case of this example, we're trying to evaluate how the change in the temperature outside impacts the number of visitors to a local park. If you're like me, you enjoy going to the park when the weather outside is just right. If it's too cold or if it's too hot, no thanks. And in this chart, you can see that most people seem to feel the same. As the temperature gets warmer, the number of park visitors increases, but as it gets too hot, that number starts to dip down again. Scatter plots can also have a legend if we want to add a third variable into the mix. In this case, maybe we want to see if the number of park visits at different temperatures varies for joggers compared to dog walkers. Oh, and before I forget, make sure you always add a title to your chart. Even though this scatter plot is fairly self-explanatory, it's important to always add a title to every chart you build. So to sum everything up, scatter plots are all about relationships. If your CEO is curious about the relationship between how long customers visit your website and how much they order, scatter plots might be a great fit. If your chief marketing officer wants to know if the amount of money spent on different marketing campaigns leads to an increase in web traffic, scatter plots could help. Anytime you have two variables that exist on a continuous scale and you want to compare the two, scatter plots might be just the trick. In fact, that's part of what makes scatter plots so important. Sometimes businesses need to understand whether or not changes in one value influence changes in another, so that they can strategically use that knowledge to their advantage. These are the kinds of relationships that help businesses compete and win against each other. It's not always easy to figure out which variables you should compare, but scatter plots can help you reach that eureka moment like few other visuals out there. Next, we're going to cover another set of amazing Power BI visuals that involve geographic data. And on the other side of that, I'll walk you through how to build and customize a scatter plot for yourself.